Deep Sea Embers Chapter 391 to 395. Suddenly, a fragment of an old conversation resurfaced in Lawrence's mind. It was a simple yet profound statement once spoken by Martha. He found himself wrestling with the nature of his memories. Were they just figments of his imagination, or did they hold the true essence of Martha as he knew her? Or was this current, Martha, standing before him a more authentic reflection of her reality? One thing, however, was unwaveringly clear: his path was destined to lead him to a place known as Frost. The exact location of Frost, however, remained shrouded in enigma. Lawrence, bearing a heavy furrow between his brows, couldn't conceal his frustration as he spoke up. We've been circling in search for the elusive path to Frost. Ever since we sneaked out of the city port, covered by the black canvas of night, we haven't been able to trace the city again. Even retracing our steps led us only to an endless expanse of ocean. Flashing a smile and shaking her head, Martha offered a surprising insight. You see, Lawrence, your approach won't lead you to Frost. Frost, it seems, has been purposefully eluding you. Caught off guard, Lawrence asked, why on earth would Frost seek to hide from me? Instead of offering a verbal response, Martha simply gestured silently towards the ethereal flame that danced undeterred on Lawrence. In that moment, a wave of realization washed over the old captain. Glancing down at his ghostly arm, he mused aloud, could it be that our unimpeded escape from the city port earlier was not a mere stroke of luck? Rather than us leaving, could it be the city itself that moved away from the white oak? Turning his gaze back to Martha, his face a unique blend of comprehension and confusion, Lawrence asked, what then is our next move? At present, the white oak is closer to the vanished than when we first set out from the port. If the city is intentionally distancing itself from me, how do I propose to find it? I'll locate it, Martha answered with an air of serene certainty. Startled, Lawrence questioned her, you're sure you can find it? Absolutely, affirmed Martha, her voice brimming with confidence. Over the years, my ship and I have formed an inseparable bond with this sea. Even if I have now parted from this great entity, it won't be aware of it immediately. Besides, the current existence of the black oak is more akin to the mirror image of the white oak. I haven't directly interacted with the vanished, at least not yet. Frost won't recoil from me, it's not as sly as you might think. Lawrence nodded, grasping only a part of her explanation. Still slightly puzzled, he asked, but if you're the only one who can approach it, what about the white oak and me? If we reveal ourselves, won't it inevitably retreat? In response, Martha merely offered a comforting smile. Closing the distance between them, she reached out and gently placed her hand on Lawrence's chest. Her gaze held a depth of wisdom that appeared to transcend mortal understanding. In a soft whisper, she suggested, the answer is simpler than you think. Let's swap our roles. In this place, the boundary between a being and its reflection isn't as clear-cut. Her suggestion struck Lawrence with surprise. He opened his mouth to delve deeper into this novel idea, but before he could formulate his questions, a faint pressure spread from his chest. This subtle force, while gentle, triggered a wave of vertigo that swept over Lawrence. He felt his balance shift, and his body began to tilt backwards. In the fleeting moments before he succumbed to unconsciousness, he was aware of a supportive form catching him from behind. Martha's calming voice echoed in his ears, take a short reprieve, dear heart. The journey that lies before us is beyond comprehension. Lawrence fell into a deep slumber. It felt like only a brief moment had passed when he was jolted awake, his first instinct to call out, Martha. The voice that responded was not Martha's, but his first mate Gus's. Captain, are you awake at last? As consciousness fully returned, Lawrence found himself struggling to sit upright. He took a deep breath to combat the disorientation from such an abrupt awakening from sleep. Surveying his surroundings, he discovered he was tucked into his bed in the captain's quarters. Gus and a few other crew members stood near with expressions of apprehension etched on their faces. Also, he recognized the familiar figure in the less conspicuous corner of the room. Anomaly 077, the mummified entity was casually toying with a noose around its neck. But the moment Lawrence's gaze landed on it, it swiftly hid the rope and feigned innocence. What happened? Lawrence managed to ask, his breathing still erratic. He ran a hand over his forehead, trying to discern the boundaries between reality and dream. The recent events shimmered in his memory like mirages, alternating between clarity and obscurity. You were brought back to the White Oak. The sailor was responsible for your return, Gus quickly replied, nodding towards the mummy in the corner. You've been unconscious for several hours. I have this recollection of venturing onto the Black Oak, of encountering Martha. Did these incidents actually occur? Lawrence continued, rubbing his forehead harder as he sought for clarity, then raising his gaze again. And where might the Black Oak be situated presently? Your memory serves you well, Captain. You did indeed board that ship, and the sailor confirmed your meeting with Miss Martha. Gus helped Lawrence to his feet, his expression turning strange midway through his explanation concerning the current location of the Black Oak. Well, Captain, the circumstances are quite extraordinary. I'm not sure how best to explain. Extraordinary. Lawrence's brow creased in confusion. In what way? Our vessel is currently non-responsive. Both the steering mechanism and the propeller are malfunctioning, leaving the White Oak as aimless as a ghost ship. As for the Black Oak, I think it's best if you witness it with your own eyes. The worry lacing Gus's words caused Lawrence's expression to harden. Shrugging off the supporting hand, he followed his crew out of the door, his face lined with deep concern. As he did so, he started to notice certain alterations, both within himself and amongst his crew. The spectral flames that had previously enveloped their bodies were now mysteriously absent. Everyone, including Lawrence, had reverted to their tangible forms, and the surrounding floor and walls no longer exhibited the fiery spectral characteristics of the vanished. It was as if every detail of their environment had somehow returned to a state of normalcy. Noticing Lawrence's examining gaze, the first mate offered a clarification. The ethereal flames dissipated a few hours ago, soon after you were returned here. Lawrence responded with a silent nod, his curiosity stirred by the hint of unease visible in his typically unflappable first mate's demeanor. Exiting the cabin alongside his crew, Lawrence stepped onto the deck of the White Oak. Almost immediately, he sensed an oddity in his surroundings. The air was damp and chilly, laden with the salty tang of the sea. The sky was unsettlingly dark, filled with ghostly shapes that floated menacingly overhead. Despite the lack of any discernible wind, he felt an unnerving sense of movement brushing against his skin. Occasionally, peculiar, bubble-like distortions appeared out of nowhere, disturbing the nearby air. As Lawrence processed the disconcerting elements of his environment, he began to comprehend the extraordinary circumstances that had transpired. His understanding deepened when First Mate Gus guided him to the ship's edge. Behold, the Black Oak. Positioned at the brink of the ship, the first mate pointed downwards towards the water below. Following Gus's gaze, Lawrence observed the ocean rolling gently, the waves formed by the White Oak's movement twisting into an eerie, unnatural pattern. Upon the distorted, mirror-like surface of the sea, he saw a reflection of their ship. The image mirrored back was of a shadowy vessel, enveloped in dense fog and darkness, with only a handful of ghostly lights punctuating its outline. The reflection seemed to sail beneath the White Oak, defying the wind's direction. At that moment, Lawrence finally grasped the full implication of Martha's final words. Their roles had been reversed, the White Oak was now a mere reflection of the Black Oak. Captain, First Mate Gus, taking note of the changes in Lawrence's countenance, surmised that the seasoned captain might have unraveled their current predicament. What's going on? Why has our reflection in the water morphed into the Black Oak? And why are we unable to steer the ship? We're not directionless, we're simply tracing the course of the Black Oak, Lawrence responded, a soft smile gracing his features. Tell the crew to rest easy. We're on our way to a location that promises the answers to all our dilemmas. A location that has the answers to all our issues. The first mate blinked in confusion. Where exactly are we going? Our final destination is Frost. As the cloak of night descended over the city-state, two distinct figures navigated their way swiftly through the desolate, curfewed streets. One was an imposing figure, broad of shoulder and shrouded in a black overcoat, a specter mirrored by the encroaching darkness. The other was notably shorter, and although bundled up in a thick winter cloak, their slight, lean physique was still discernible. An icy breeze whipped through the street, prompting the shorter figure to sneeze vehemently. Achoo. Duncan, the taller of the two, glanced down at Shirley, who was now rubbing her nose. I had advised you to wear a scarf, but you dismissed the idea. The nights in Frost are considerably chillier than in planned. This cold, Shirley involuntarily tightened her attire. Despite her warm clothing, the biting wind still sent an unwelcome shiver through her body. Being a native of Planned, she was still acclimating to Frost's harsh climate. I'm beginning to regret venturing out. Duncan responded with a dry smile. You proclaimed you'd rather do anything than be stuck with homework. Reminded of her earlier bravado, Shirley held her head high against the biting wind, asserting, indeed, that's exactly what I said. Among all your peers, your tenacity is unparalleled. Duncan sighed, a sense of helpless amusement washing over him. He then shifted his gaze, his eyes fixated on a distant alley. We should keep moving, I'd rather not cross paths with the night patrol. Struggling to match Duncan's brisk stride, Shirley, despite her shorter legs, managed to keep pace. Her curiosity piqued. She asked, what's the objective of this outing? We're paying a visit to ensure someone's well-being, Duncan replied nonchalantly, pressing onward. Visiting someone. Shirley looked up at the towering captain beside her. Who are we visiting? The gatekeeper, Agatha, Duncan responded in a tone laced with indifference. However, his eyes were focused on something far beyond the shadow-cloaked street, towards its endpoint. A few eerie, green flames danced within his line of sight, their intensity fluctuating as if being observed through a thick mist. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. In Duncan's sensory realm, two irregular blips had drawn his attention. Both of them were different from the regular markers he was accustomed to, signaling anomalies that demanded his further inspection. The first anomaly originated from a specific object, the White Oak, a ship that he had once been engulfed with a torrent of ethereal flames. However, even though it was subjected to such baptism, the ship continued to radiate a potent presence. This presence manifested in Duncan's perception like a vibrant fireball, though its exact location remained elusive. Whenever Duncan attempted to pinpoint the White Oak, the results were mystifying and indistinct, suggesting that it was situated somewhere close to Frost. Yet, that particular area had already been secured under a joint blockade established by the Mist Fleet and the Frost Navy. The second, troublesome, anomaly was related to an individual, specifically the female gatekeeper, Agatha. Lately, Duncan had noticed disturbances in the marker he had earlier implanted on the heavily bandaged woman. Amidst these interferences, Agatha's energy signature had considerably weakened multiple times, and her location started to exhibit the same murky and warped characteristics as the White Oak. When Duncan endeavored to remotely check on Agatha's status, he was taken aback to discover that her aura would occasionally vanish entirely within the city limits. Two puzzling markers, pertaining to a ship and a person, situated in different locations, yet displaying parallel anomalies, unquestionably merited further investigation. Given the circumstances, he decided to conduct a personal inquiry into the matter as darkness fell. There was no immediate clue concerning the White Oak's whereabouts, however, Agatha's marker, despite its sporadic movement within Frost, should be relatively nearby. Duncan cast a glance downwards at Shirley, who was observing her surroundings with intrigued eyes beside him. Involving Dog, a shadow demon, could prove advantageous due to its enhanced perception abilities. If any adherents of the Annihilation cult were active in the vicinity, it would likely be capable of sensing their distinctive, kindred, aura. As night draped over the city, gas lamps lining the roads were illuminated. The occasional sounds of night patrol whistles and distant dog barks were faintly audible, punctuating the rhythmic sounds of the distant ocean waves. During the curfew, the streets were bereft of life and bore a chilling atmosphere. Not even the sporadic light trickling from the buildings could thaw the frosty chill of winter. Guided under such conditions, Duncan navigated Shirley through another alley, and in his supernatural vision, the glowing cluster symbolizing Agatha was still erratically moving not far away. Mr. Duncan, do you think the gatekeeper, if she spots me, will she attack me with a sword? Shirley chattered nervously, referencing the way Vanna treated heretics. Gatekeepers don't use swords, Duncan replied nonchalantly. I've heard from Vanna that they wield specially crafted battle staffs and utilize divine arts sourced from the realm of death to confront heretics. Shirley visibly recoiled at this information and fell quiet. However, Duncan barely registered the girl's reaction. After they turned into a narrow street, he abruptly came to a stop. Shirley came to a sudden stop alongside him, surveying their surroundings with an air of acute alertness. Have you detected something? Is the gatekeeper somewhere nearby? She asked apprehensively. She's not merely nearby, she's right here, Duncan said, his voice steady and his gaze methodically scanning the entirety of the alleyway, and it appears she has been here for quite some time. She's here, Shirley exclaimed, her eyes expanding with surprise. As if touched by an icy breeze, she stared ahead, her anxiety escalating. Where, I can't see her. Dog, can you detect her? I can't discern anything. Dog's voice emerged from the surrounding shadows, sounding subdued and muffled. I can't visually spot anyone, nor can I sense any presence. Even Dog can't identify her. Duncan's brow creased slightly. In front of him, a small cluster of flames signifying Agatha flickered silently a few meters away, its glow faint and ghostly. The gatekeeper was indeed present, she had been reposing in this spot. Duncan slowly advanced towards the spot where the spectral flames were located, only to halt his steps. Agatha seemed to have perceived something. The cluster of flames surged abruptly as he neared, then swiftly shifted in another direction. Duncan raised his head, casting his gaze in the direction where the cluster of flames was relocating in his sensory perception. Suddenly, a transient shadow on the glass window of a nearby building attracted his attention. He observed a blurred figure dart across the glass surface, the silhouette vaguely reminiscent of Agatha. Shirley, who had also been inspecting their surroundings, spotted the shadow. Her shock was almost enough to elicit a scream, but she swiftly clamped her hand over her mouth. After the shadow had passed, she swiveled towards Duncan, her voice quivering, I just saw a shadow. I noticed it too. It was reflected in the window, Duncan responded in a resonant voice, his gaze still placidly fixed ahead. In a realm invisible to Shirley, he was persistently observing that cluster of flames. The flames had traversed the alley, flickered at the corner ahead, and then reversed direction. He squinted slightly as if visualizing Agatha's situation in his mind. It appeared as though she was attempting to extricate herself from some form of predicament. She could potentially be injured or immensely fatigued. She had briefly rested here before proceeding towards the upper part of the city. Something seemed to have temporarily impeded her at the junction, but it was insufficient to halt her progress. Duncan opened his eyes, his gaze once again resting on the glass window not far off. The polished window glass no longer captured Agatha's figure, merely reflecting the indistinct image of a distant street lamp. Reflection, Duncan murmured to himself, fascinating. Shirley wore a look of confusion. What's happening? Did you figure something out? Potentially, Duncan replied, his voice carrying an undertone of ambiguity. He then approached the glass window and lightly snapped his fingers. A petite cluster of flames kindled at his fingertips, casting a warm glow on his form. He turned his gaze towards the window and observed his flame being replicated. The reflected light seemed to possess an ethereal life of its own, silently burning in the mirror realm. Shirley watched Duncan's actions with a befuddled expression, then saw him nonchalantly swipe his hand, extinguishing the flame at his fingertips. Yet, a soft green radiance continued to flicker in her line of sight. Shirley's mouth gradually fell open in astonishment at the sight unfolding before her. After Duncan had dispersed the flames in his grasp, the flame mirrored in the glass window did not exhibit any signs of fading. The reflected flame continued to burn in tranquility, as if it possessed a separate existence thriving within the mirror. What's happening? Shirley pointed at the flame in the glass window, stammering towards Duncan, why does the flame persist? A mirrored frost, Duncan slowly swiveled his head, a touch of amusement tinging his voice, is gradually amalgamating with the real-world frost. A marvelous concept, to my mind, teeming with inventiveness. Mirrored, Shirley barely comprehended, but she still instinctively echoed the word, you mean there's a frost within the mirror? Has that gatekeeper ventured into the mirror world? Not entirely precise, but you could interpret it that way. Duncan responded serenely, shifting his gaze back to the undisturbed flame reflection still ablaze in the mirror. There's a minor fracture here, but it's inadequate. Inadequate. Shirley blinked in puzzlement. I require a more exact location, a stronger link. Duncan slowly extended his hand, his fingertip making contact with the spectral fire in the mirror. To ignite the world residing beyond the mirror, this meager flame isn't sufficient. But. He paused, withdrawing his finger. The phantom flame mirrored in the glass flickered abruptly, then plunged into the somber depths, leaving behind only a faint trace of ghostly green stretching into the distance. That should suffice to lend Agatha a hand. How many counterfeits crafted from primal elements had she obliterated? How many avatars of the blonde youth had she shattered? After surpassing the 4-digit threshold, Agatha lost interest in maintaining the tally. The sole fact she was certain of was that the heretic had spoken the truth about one matter. She was indeed ensnared in this peculiar world with seemingly no imminent prospects of escape. The sky held a muted shade, and the clouds swarmed chaotically. In this version of Frost, devoid of sunlight, the distinction between day and night had become elusive. Only the subtle shifts in luminosity filtering through the cloud cover and the glow emanating from the gas street lamps provided an indication that the shroud of night had descended. Agatha weaved her way through a narrow alleyway, her pace brisk as she strived to maintain her calm breath and mend her physical and mental injuries. Her black coat bore the brunt of relentless battles, suffering damage at several locations. The underlying combat soft armor too was severely battered, revealing her shoulders, flanks, and other areas. Her bandages and skin beneath were visible, tainted with trickles of blood seeping through. To be fair, the adversary wasn't particularly formidable. Even the avatars employed by the blonde heretic didn't pose a significant threat to Agatha, a powerful gatekeeper. They only required a few minutes of effort to eliminate. But their numbers were unending. The entire city served as their material and backup troops for regeneration. Conventional combat methods were rendered entirely ineffectual in this scenario. As Agatha navigated the alley, she swiftly performed calculations in her mind. Simultaneously, she recollected the eerie and frightening sensation she had experienced a few minutes prior. She had been taking a brief respite in a shadowy alley when a horrifying presence abruptly invaded her senses. The pressure was so intense that it felt as though her heart had ceased to beat for a few fleeting seconds. In that instant, she had hastily abandoned her sanctuary without much deliberation. But upon reflection, that daunting presence didn't seem to originate from this bizarre forgery city. What could it have been? Without warning, Agatha came to a sudden stop, her gaze transfixed on an unusual sight that had abruptly interrupted her thoughts at the junction of the narrow alleyway. In a shadowed corner, a disturbing spectacle unfolded. A slew of abhorrent, black, ooze-like substances began to surge and bubble ominously. They emanated from the alley's stone walls and ground, reminiscent of an overflowing sewer pipe disgorging foul and viscous filth. The repugnant, squelching noises added to the nauseating scene as the mounds of substance rapidly morphed into crude human forms, their hostile glares fixed solely on Agatha. Persistent monsters, Agatha muttered to herself, a hint of annoyance seeping into her voice. But her determined resolve did not waver. Even before these monstrous, muddy forms could fully solidify, she brandished her staff assertively, directing it towards the figure that was nearest to her. A white-hot, brilliant flame suddenly erupted from seemingly nowhere, instantly engulfing the writhing abomination, the so-called primal element. The heat of incineration reduced it instantly to nothing but fine ash. The next second, a swirling vortex of gray wind surged in the alley, barreling through the freshly formed humanoid creatures rising one after another. This wind, imbued with an unstoppable force of consumption and erosion, transformed them into desiccated, crumbling dust. Yet, the relentless ooze continued to emerge from the walls and ground, spawning more humanoid monstrosities at the alley's intersection, effectively hindering Agatha's movements. As the dust-laden wind swept by, Agatha's figure momentarily appeared from within it. Her face bore additional lines of fatigue, and her eyes, sensing an uncanny presence within the ooze, narrowed into a hardened stare. She turned to face this new disturbance, just as another, forgery, composed of the primal elements began to writhe and mutate rapidly. In a matter of seconds, it took on the form of a young man, golden-haired and grinning, clad in a pristine white shirt and a black vest. Miss Gatekeeper, you are impressively resilient, the faux young man said, acknowledging her with a slight nod, his voice smooth and polite. Are you finding our little game here enjoyable? If you think you can exhaust me in this drawn-out battle, you're sorely mistaken, Agatha retorted sharply, her cold gaze locked onto this new avatar of the young man as she steadied her breathing. Death is of no consequence to me. I can fight even beyond death. The spirit of a gatekeeper never tires, and rest assured, one day, I will find you. Of course, bringing down a saint of Bartok is no simple task, the young man laughed in response, his bright smile unwavering. I've never aimed to kill you. I simply aim to detain you here for as long as possible. These empty husks that you slaughter so easily. They are nothing more than a mere distraction, a source of entertainment for your apparent boredom. Your perverse form of hospitality is certainly unique, Agatha retorted, well aware that her opponent was employing various tactics to stall her. However, for the moment, she was content to engage in this verbal sparring, buying time to recuperate her strength. I can't help but wonder, is your true form as complacent as this? I can sense it. With each monster under your control that I vanquish, I'm getting closer to your concealed refuge. How many more hiding places do you have left? A fleeting flicker of hesitation passed over the blond young man's face, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced by a gleaming, cheerful smile. Ah, it seems I underestimated the acute senses of Bartok's guardians. How about we make a wager? He extended his hand in a mock gesture of invitation. The bet is whether you'll find my real body first or Frost becomes the first mortal nation to greet the arrival of a god. The stakes are your soul and the lives of all the people in Frost. Before he could finish his words, a pale, ferocious flame erupted, engulfing the area where the young man stood. The next instant, Agatha had transformed into a screaming gray wind, a furious tempest that pummeled the connection where the forgeries were congregating. Despite their attempts to halt the storm, they were obliterated under its relentless, lethal force. In the blink of an eye, the gust of wind also assaulted the blond young man, who was now entangled in the fierce flames, launching him directly onto a low wall at the far end of the alleyway. After a thunderous crash, the flames scattered, and Agatha emerged from the gray wind. She gripped her staff in her right hand, the pointed end piercing the young man's chest, pinning him securely to the wall. Apologies, but I won't be placing any bets, Agatha stared unblinkingly into his eyes, her own gaze calm and resolute. The clergy are expressly forbidden from gambling. Fascinating, the heretic, skewered on the staff, curled his lips in a twisted smile. Despite his rapidly deteriorating form, he appeared unaffected by fear or pain, even as he bled a viscous black sludge. I do hope your cool demeanor and confidence endure a little longer. As the life force ebbed away from him, the young man's figure rapidly crumbled and melted, transmuting into a pool of black ooze that dripped down and quickly solidified upon hitting the ground. The remaining forgeries under his control also became still, reverting back into inert, primal elements. Agatha retrieved her staff from the crumbling wall. With an expression of mild revulsion, she flicked off the grimy residue that clung to it. She then lifted her gaze, scanning the direction of the city's upper district with a calculating eye. Another proxy had been obliterated, and in the process of its disintegration, the bond between Agatha, the gatekeeper, and the elusive heretic in the shadows, had grown even stronger. She felt closer. Quite the confidence I have here, humph. I always did trust myself, Agatha muttered under her breath. She drew a few deep, calming breaths, leaned on her staff for support, and slowly advanced towards the direction she had identified. Unbeknownst to Agatha, behind her, a green flame had ignited within a puddle's reflective surface, casting an eerie light onto the shadowed alleyway. In the heart of the silent cathedral, candles cast a warm, inviting glow. The rhythmic sound of a staff and shoe heels echoing against the stone flooring punctuated the otherwise serene atmosphere. A tall figure, cloaked in black, traversed the darkened entrance and approached a platform on which rested a black sarcophagus. A voice, weathered and slightly raspy, emanated from the confines of the container. Agatha, you're back. How fares the second water route? The first group of people has just made it to the western entrance, and it's going to take a full day just to clear the vertical shaft and transport down the necessary equipment, Agatha replied, a note of helplessness in her voice. You need to exercise some patience, Bishop Ivan. Oh, a pause lingered within the coffin, followed by another query. And what of the conditions at the western entrance? Agatha remained silent for a moment before sighing heavily. What can you expect from an underground facility that's been abandoned for half a century? I've mustered 12 heavy machine guns, 3 steam walkers, an abundance of holy oil and fire-blessed bullets, and 150 fully equipped death priests to dispel the lurking darkness. The silver lining is that we've established our first foothold at the junction beneath the vertical shaft, and we've managed to restore power and lighting in a few adjoining corridors. If we don't encounter further cave-ins or gas leaks, the exploration might progress more smoothly than anticipated. Have there been any indications of the heretics? Not so far, Agatha shook her head in response. But we're uncertain about what lies deeper within. The second waterway is an expansive maze, and the sections blocked off by cave-ins make navigation tricky. We've managed to secure only the first corridor of one such section. However, there is one aspect that is somewhat unsettling. A rustling sound of fabric stirred from within the coffin, followed by the dark lid shifting upward from the inside. Bishop Ivan gradually rose up as one would expect of a mummy. A troubling development. The mummy inquired, his voice a low rumble, to elaborate. We discovered evidence of repair and alterations in some of the old pipeline ends and a few suspicious offshoot pipes that disappear into the shadowy depths, Agatha confessed, her brows furrowing as she spoke. We cross-referenced the original blueprints in our archives, verifying that these pipes were not part of the initial design. Bishop Ivan remained silent for a moment, digesting the information, before querying, what is your interpretation of this? It appears that someone undertook the maintenance and modification of these pipes subsequent to the abandonment of the second waterway. Agatha divulged her thoughts. This maintenance was sporadic, with various areas falling into disrepair after being serviced for several years. However, it's plausible that some operational sections persist further within the sewer system. Bishop Ivan listened attentively, and after a significant pause, he offered his insight. The second waterway, it's an enormous underground labyrinth capable of concealing a myriad of secrets. Even if we were to deploy all our guardian forces, it wouldn't suffice to cover all its passages and intersections. Therefore, don't overemphasize these minor modification traces. Prioritize the search for the heretics. Leave the remaining matters to City Hall's discretion. Agatha cast a glance at Bishop Ivan, nodding in thoughtful agreement. You appear fatigued, Bishop Ivan observed the weariness etched on the gatekeeper's face. The scale of the exploration shouldn't have depleted your energy this much. Are you unwell? You've seemed distracted since your arrival. Agatha parted her lips, hesitation briefly flickering across her face before she finally confessed, I am a bit unsettled. Feeling troubled. The voice of Bishop Ivan seemed to transform as he took in Agatha's words. His gaze intensified, drilling into Agatha's eyes with a profound seriousness. Such feelings of unease aren't desirable for a spiritual figure. Would you share with me what has occurred? When did you start feeling this way? It began after my return from the polluted wastewater treatment facility, Agatha shared freely. She held nothing back, knowing full well that the esteemed bishop was perhaps her most trustworthy confidant within the entire city-state. I'm continually haunted by the feeling that I've missed something, that I accidentally left something behind. But no matter how many times I replay the events of that day in my mind, I can't identify anything wrong. The wastewater treatment facility, Bishop Ivan echoed in a deep rumble. He was, of course, well aware of Agatha's incident. It had been quickly reported to the authorities at the Silent Cathedral and City Hall. An ongoing investigation and purification process had followed. I have been keeping up with the situation as well. The surviving supervisor is presently under psychiatric care, and we've lost contact with around a dozen employees who worked there. Based on the on-site sampling reports, you seem to have eliminated the entire facility's contamination. Theoretically, there should be no remaining threats. But I can't shake off this unease, Agatha admitted, even without any solid proof to back it. I can't disregard the chance that I might have overlooked something. Did you check your mental state? What were the cognitive calibration results? He inquired. I did, Agatha nodded, both self-conducted cognitive calibration and subconscious evaluations with a psychiatrist. None of these showed any irregularities. After a significant pause, Bishop Ivan broke his silence. In that case, this might be an internal warning. Maybe it's coming from your subconscious mind, or your precognitive abilities, or it could even be a signal from your faith. I plan to go back to the facility for another inspection, Agatha declared, nodding, but first, I need to seek spiritual guidance through prayer in the cathedral. Bishop Ivan gave her a subtle nod. Go ahead, and may your prayer time bring you peace. Agatha responded with a grunt of agreement, then stood up and left the platform where the sarcophagus was located. After a brief moment, she disappeared through the grand doors of the silent cathedral. The vast cathedral was swallowed by a deep silence, leaving only Bishop Ivan, draped in his vestments like a mummy, lingering by the sarcophagus. He watched the direction Agatha had left in, seemingly lost in thought. After some time, he sighed softly, his hand gently tracing the triangular amulet of Bartok on his chest, May the Lord guide. Located just beyond the borders of the city-state of Frost, next to the local waters, a patrol vessel bearing the emblem of Frost's navy was diligently performing its rounds. The ship was sailing on a predetermined course, scanning the expansive sea. The naval commander found himself on the ship's foredeck, his brow creased as he gazed at the distant sea, aglow with the ethereal light of the world's creation in the night sky. Amidst the undulating waves, pieces of ice of varying sizes sporadically appeared. These icy remnants followed a distinct trajectory from a distance, quietly creating an unseen borderline. The commander knew the truth behind these seemingly natural icebergs. They weren't just ice fragments but formed part of the formidable mist fleet. The ice served as a protective cover for the sea mist, a fearsome ghost ship cursed with eternal frost. The formation of such ice was an ominous indication of the ship's presence, marking the pirate captain's territory, and acting as a powerful symbol of the curse engulfing the sea mist. Any ship daring to approach the ghost ship without the necessary permission would be subjected to a chilling baptism by these ominous icebergs. A mild encounter could hinder a ship's mobility, while a severe one could encase the ship in ice, transforming the crew into frozen souls trapped within their icy tomb. The sea mist often used this tactic to blockade sea routes, intercepting unsuspecting merchant ships that strayed into its territory and demanding a so-called iceberg handling fee. In most cases, the mere threat was sufficient to enforce this disgraceful act of piracy without firing a single shot. At present, the tense standoff between the Mist Fleet and Frost's navy had temporarily cooled down. While the icebergs wouldn't actively infringe upon the Navy's patrol ships, their mere existence was a strong deterrent, sending a clear and intimidating message. Even at Frost's doorstep, beyond that lay the territory of the Mist Fleet. The commander, clad in the uniform of Frost's navy, gritted his teeth and heaved a heavy sigh, striving to pacify his restless mind. Their primary obligation as soldiers was to the greater good, which required them to abide by their superiors' decisions. Oddly enough, the city-state's stability hinged upon the notorious Mist Fleet's presence right now due to the critical importance of that blockade. The fog is creeping in over the sea again, a junior officer reported as he emerged onto the deck, casting a concerned glance into the distance. It's becoming a daily event. The patrol ship's commander looked out to the sea. As his subordinate had observed, a dense fog was indeed starting to shroud the sea. The signature fog of the sea mist was gradually forming over the sea's surface, spreading around the icy borderline. The ethereal light from the world's creation seeped into the fog, casting a ghostly, spectral glow across the seascape. It's likely the work of the sea mist again, the commander grimaced. That ship always brings ice and fog in its wake. The sea mist hasn't moved from its position, the subordinate pointed out. Maybe the pirate general is just asserting his control. No matter his intent, the commander waved off the suggestion with a shake of his head. We should avoid the regions of fog and ice. Frost shouldn't be the first to break the truce. Understood, sir. Acknowledging the junior officer's salute with a grunt, the commander turned his attention back to the distant fog, his brow furrowed in puzzlement. But doesn't the fog seem unusually thick tonight? The subordinate followed the commander's gaze and observed that the fog encircling the icy boundary was indeed growing and appeared denser than usual. Something appeared to be faintly wavering within the intensifying fog. The fog is indeed getting thicker, the junior officer muttered. Could there be something concealed within the fog? Something is off. The patrol ship commander's expression became even more grave. He quickly grabbed his telescope and aimed it at the area swallowed by the dense fog. After a few moments of careful observation, he confirmed that a sizable object was indeed moving within the thick haze. It was heading their way. It was a ship. A ship is emerging from the mist fleet's patrol area. The commander quickly put down the telescope, urgency lacing his voice. Use the signal light. The mist fleet has crossed the boundary. Order them to stop immediately. Right away, sir. The junior officer's voice echoed in agreement, and he quickly sprinted towards the back of the deck. Within moments, the powerful searchlight mounted on the upper part of the patrol ship was activated, casting a sequence of light signals into the all-encompassing fog. However, the ship's silhouette within the fog did not slow down. The patrol ship commander kept his gaze fixed on the vague shadow in the fog, noting that it not only failed to slow down, but in fact sped up. As it came closer, the fog over the surrounding sea seemed to deliberately dissipate. In a short span of time, the billowing haze had advanced to within 100 meters of the patrol ship, showing an alarming tendency to surround the vessel from all sides. Cursed pirates! The patrol ship commander muttered a nearly inaudible curse. He turned and rushed towards the bridge, shouting as he made a direct path for the control panel. Reverse. Turn the ship around. That behemoth is charging right at us. Has there been any response from the mist fleet? No response to the signal light. The short-range calls also remain unanswered. A soldier stationed at the control panel yelled back, "We're trying to contact the sea mist on the agreed frequency, but there's no reply." Wait, there's a response now. Suddenly, the communication light on the control panel lit up, and the automated recorder started its rhythmic ticking and clicking. A lengthy punch tape continually spewed from the machine. The communications officer quickly collected the tape and scanned the inscriptions on it. After a moment, he looked up in confusion. The mist fleet claims they haven't crossed the boundary. All their ships are anchored. All anchored. The patrol ship commander's eyes bulged in disbelief, and then he glanced out the window to see the dense fog already creeping onto his vessel's bow. Although the helmsman was working hard to steer the ship away, the ship's speed obviously couldn't outrun the disturbingly fast spread of the fog. Within the continually rolling haze, the vague shadow relentlessly advanced. Turn. Hard to port, turn now. The patrol ship suddenly veered to the side, its steam core letting out a deep growl. The rudder and side paddle thrusters cooperated, forcing the ship to swerve in the fog with such intensity that it risked tearing the vessel apart. Amidst the violent shaking and uproar, the patrol ship commander clung to the railing beside him, his eyes glued to the scene unfolding outside the porthole. Emerging from the rapidly clearing fog, a gigantic ship surged forward, nearly brushing against the railings of the patrol ship. It didn't belong to the Frost Navy, nor was it a part of the Mist Fleet. It was a corroded relic of a battleship from an ancient era. Its significantly weathered paint and old-fashioned bow structure silently narrated the countless hardships it had endured over the years. The patrol ship commander stared, shocked, at the massive ship as it sailed past his patrol vessel. After a few seconds, he swiftly regained his senses, recalling an illustration and related record he had once seen in a historical document. That's the Warrior, reported to have sunk 4 decades ago. Upon their modest patrol vessel, the crew found themselves utterly spellbound by the startling emergence of a gargantuan ship piercing through the dense, all-enveloping blanket of fog. Full steam ahead and keep your distance. The commander shouted, swiftly snapping back from his initial shock. Avoid its wake at all costs. Their proximity to such an imposing, seemingly military ship presented grave dangers, particularly for their unassuming patrol vessel. They were at risk of being engulfed in the turbulent aftercurrent produced by the larger ship, ominously known as the Warrior. In such treacherous conditions, even a slight disturbance or the faintest contact could spell disaster for their vessel. Responding to the command, the ship's steam engine sprung to life with a thunderous roar. The helmsman was thrust into the toughest test of his maritime career as he grappled with the steering wheel, striving to navigate the patrol ship safely away from the threatening colossus. Despite his long years of sailing and command, he found himself straining every sinew of his ability, teetering on the brink of catastrophe as the ship heaved perilously to and fro. "We're on a collision course. Impact is imminent." A terrified voice from one of the crew members sliced through the frenetic atmosphere. Moved by instinct, the sailors scrambled to grab hold of the nearest railings and handholds, bracing for a brutal impact that could potentially send them flying overboard. However, just as their patrol vessel's side grazed the stern of the Warrior, the mammoth ship dissolved into nothingness. The Warrior had dematerialized, evaporating into thin air right before their dumbfounded gaze. Much like the abrupt termination of a nightmarish dream, the formidable warship that had been casting a daunting shadow across the heavens vanished in an instant. What lingered was an eerie collection of memories and a lingering sense of dread that gnawed at their consciousness. The crew members on the bridge and deck exchanged bewildered glances, each looking as though they were stirring from a profoundly disquieting dream, their spatial awareness disoriented. As the heavy fog began to lift, revealing the austere light of the world's creation glistening on the sea's surface, the brisk ocean breeze nudged many back to the stark reality. The vast, boundless sea lay before them, disturbed only by the rhythmic undulation of waves and distant, twirling fragments of ice. The patrol ship's commander slowly loosened his white-knuckled grip on the railing, made his way to the window, and scrutinized the horizon with a critical eye. A junior officer sidled up to him, his voice barely a whisper as if musing to himself, was that just a collective hallucination? Did we really encounter a phantom ship? No, it wasn't an illusion, the commander responded, his voice low yet imbued with certainty. He raised a hand, pointing towards a visibly damaged guardrail visible through the porthole. See that? The guardrail bears the marks of a collision. We did indeed make contact. But where did it vanish to? The prior, Seagull, didn't behave in such a manner, even when it was utterly destroyed. The Seagull didn't just evaporate into thin air. Moreover, the ocean currents surrounding us shifted abruptly. The helmsman even grappled with controlling our course. The commander allowed silence to fill the air for a brief moment. Following a lengthy period of introspection, he finally spoke. Perhaps, we inadvertently ventured into some kind of spatial anomaly. It wasn't the phantom ship that materialized and dematerialized so rapidly, but rather, it was us. Shock and dread swiftly spread across the subordinate's countenance. He instinctively cast his gaze out into the vast sea and towards the direction of Frost, inquiring, "So, have we returned to our own reality now?" "Establish communication with the sea mist and Frost," the commander promptly ordered after a momentary pause, "compare their responses to ascertain our current position. Until we can conclusively determine our status, evade any ship that emerges in the nearby waters." "Understood, sir." They encountered a warship that was believed to have sunk 4 decades ago. And said warship subsequently vanished just as they were on the verge of colliding. Inside the captain's cabin of the Sea Mist, Tyrion reclined in his chair, a look of surprise flashing across his face after hearing the report from his first officer, Aiden, and they continue to roam aimlessly in the patrol area because they're uncertain if they've returned to the real world. Yes, the patrol ship's commander seems to have deduced from the myriad of anomalies surrounding the Warrior that they momentarily stepped into what he's calling an anomalous sea. Now they're attempting to reach out to both the Mist Fleet and Frost, striving to discern whether their current environment is real, Aiden affirmed, shrugging slightly. "I believe they might be overreacting due to fear." "No, their caution is absolutely warranted," Tyrion disagreed, shaking his head with a stern expression. "We may harbor reservations about the current Frost Navy, but we must acknowledge their half-century-long service in safeguarding the city-state. Their experience in confronting supernatural phenomena is just as comprehensive as ours." The commander's interpretation is likely accurate. Upon hearing the captain's remarks, Aiden's countenance turned grave. So, they genuinely did momentarily stumble into an anomalous sea that intersects with our world. And they encountered the Warrior there. The Warrior, I remember that ship well. The Queen herself graced its launch, Tyrion mused, a hint of nostalgia creeping into his voice. Do you recall the circumstances under which it met its watery end? Yes, I recall that quite well. We were the ones who orchestrated its demise, First Mate Aiden confirmed, nodding as the memory came into sharp focus. After it was commandeered by the rebels and refitted, it was dispatched with the mission to eliminate our renegade fleet. However, in our first face-off, it was sent to its watery grave off the shores of Frost, courtesy of your strategic ambush. A relentless onslaught of heavy artillery breached the ammunition depot and fuel storage. The mighty ship was virtually cleaved in half. Indeed, it was split apart, but the warrior that the patrol ship reported was an intact entity, Tyrion countered. This indicates that it was a spectral replica, akin to the seagull. Frost has been persistently investigating the origins of these doppelganger ships that appear to materialize out of thin air. Aiden mused aloud, could it be a concealed dimension overlapping with ours? Frost will soon be informed of this recent development, and their sharper minds will explore this possibility. As for us, there's no need to meddle in their affairs. We have our own responsibilities to uphold. Do you intend to convey this information to the old captain? Indeed, he's been eagerly anticipating my updates, Tyrion confirmed, motioning towards the door. You should leave first, ensure the door is securely closed, and prevent any interruptions. Understood, Captain. Tyrion has reported a new development. Within a temporary dwelling on Oak Street in Frost, Duncan relayed the information to Morris and Vanna, who were seated across from him. Beside him, Nina was deeply engrossed in a historical tome, while Shirley, who had been accompanying him until late, was already on the brink of sleep. A new development. Morris quickly straightened up. Did an incident occur at sea? A Frost patrol vessel encountered a naval warship that had sunk 40 years ago in the southwestern sea. It's suspected to be a doppelganger, much like the seagull. However, there was no hostile engagement between them. Following a minor collision, the doppelganger warship vanished right before the patrol crew's eyes. Presently, it's uncertain whether a new doppelganger has spontaneously surfaced in the sea or if the patrol ship briefly transitioned into an abnormal ocean parallel to our world. The latter hypothesis appears more plausible. An abnormal sea parallel to our world, Morris echoed, his expression gradually becoming solemn as he looked up. This seems to corroborate the findings from your investigation tonight. Indeed, another Frost reflected in the mirror. If all these doppelgangers and the cultists' lairs are concealed within this mirrored domain, that would explain why we haven't been able to identify the origin of the contamination, despite scouring the entire city, Duncan articulated slowly. Let's not forget the young man, Crow, who vanished and reappeared as if from thin air. The unusually large population of clones within the city-state with untraceable origins, several unexplained disappearances, it's all starting to form a coherent picture. Both Morris and Vanna exchanged glances, their expressions mirrored in their mutual gravitas about the escalating situation. Ordinary heretics and demons, I can contend with. Even when confronted with a formidable adversary, amassing a greater number of troops and intensifying our firepower has always been a reliable strategy. However, when it comes to an enemy lurking within a mirror, Vanna's brow creased, a tinge of vexation revealing itself on her face. I find myself grappling with the problem. I can't even begin to fathom how those heretics accomplished this. If this realm is indeed under the dominion of the Nether Lord, then its sway is palpably not restricted to spreading from the abyssal depths to the surface. It appears to be proliferating at an alarming rate. This is no longer a minor disturbance, akin to creating a few copies, Morris appended his analysis. Both experts appeared to be wrestling with the convoluted nature of the predicament. Observing their struggle, Duncan couldn't resist a chuckle. In fact, I've already hurled a proverbial spark into the mirror. Morris and Vanna responded in unison. What?